Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 42 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's pretty strong selection, it has to be said, of GT class, or primarily GT class race cars, but also some other vehicles which fit within similar parameters, like your Zonda R, your Ferrari FXX, that kind of thing. And in this particular pick, we're featuring a vehicle which I personally find to be quite intriguing, because although it's technically a good car, it's also, in my opinion at least, kind of an overrated one. Because this car certainly has fans. There are people who seem to think it's an outstandingly good race car, which I can understand why. It does have very, very distinct advantages, but at the same time, this car, in my opinion anyway, suffers from the Ford GT Spec 2 syndrome, and that is, it has an amount of importance placed upon it which it doesn't really deserve. And the reason why I say that is because, well, there's a few reasons. It's not a bad car by any means, but it's just not as amazing as you might hope or expect, because straight off the bat, this is not a real car. It's based on a real car, the Tokyo Motor Show GTR concept, but the racing version itself is not a real race car. This is a PD original vehicle, like many others on the game, such as the Camaro LM, and many of them are very good, such as the Camaro LM. But this particular car makes some interesting choices as far as the GTR base model and what they decided to do with it. Not necessarily good or bad choices, just interesting. For a start, this is one of those cars which for some reason I always think of as being all-wheel drive. But it's not, it's rear-wheel drive. It just seems like the kind of car that should be all-wheel drive. If it's not a real race car, you might as well give it that advantage. Why not? It has that kind of ultimate race car look to it, so why not follow that up? It would, of course, not be the only GTR race car to have all-wheel drive. Both Scholl's models are all-wheel drive race cars, and that is a good advantage to have. The old Celsonic R32 is also, of course, an all-wheel drive car, so there is a precedent there. And, of course, the vast majority of road-going GTRs are all-wheel drive as well, so why not do the same with this? But at any rate, they chose not to, and that's an interesting choice. Not necessarily a bad one either, given that rear-wheel drive race cars can be more nimble around corners, whereas all-wheel drive cars have a very easy tendency to be a little bit too grippy and therefore understeer. Now, in terms of spec, any GTR-based vehicle is pretty much always going to be strong, and this car is. It's powered by a 3.5 litre turbo engine, and it puts out some strong specs: 1,031 horsepower, 810 foot-pounds of torque, and it weighs in at a respectable 1,100 kilos. Put that together and you're looking at 937 horsepower per tonne and a pretty high PP, 680, fully tuned. And given that this car costs 1 million credits, that's potentially quite good value, because although there are definitely cars with a similar spec that are cheaper, such as, ironically, some of the other GTR race cars, at the same time that's still a pretty good price. Many of the really good race cars of this series tend to be around the 1 million credit price tag anyway, so that's certainly not too much. But one of the ways that this car lets itself down, or lets us down more specifically, is its straight line speed. Because there's a very strange thing about this car which you would think would give it a huge advantage, and on paper it does, but it's kind of squandered. And that is that this is one of the very, very few race cars on GT6 which can have NOS. Now, back on Gran Turismo 4, you could fit NOS to most of the race cars, but after GT5 it became much, much rarer to be able to do so. So to have NOS on your already 1,031 horsepower race car is potentially a massive advantage to have. Imagine the kind of acceleration that that can give you. And it does give you excellent acceleration even though it's not all-wheel drive. The downside though, and the reason why I said it feels squandered to have it on this car, is because of the top speed. For no good reason, the top speed on this car is frankly awful. This car struggles to pass 235 miles per hour even with NOS, and that is just ridiculous. Given how fast all of the other GTR race cars are, even the JGTC models, which typically aren't known for their speed, the NSX and Supra being an example, it just should be a lot quicker than that. 250 at least, surely. And yet it just doesn't seem to be capable of that. And the strange thing is, it seems to suffer from what I call the TVR Speed 12 syndrome, where, especially with NOS, you have phenomenal acceleration, but then it just peters out to nothing for no apparent reason. The Speed 12 is one of the quickest accelerating cars in the game, but then it just stops once it gets to 265 for no good reason. This car does the same, but the speed is around 230 instead, and that's a real shame, because top speed is a very significant advantage to have in a GT class race car, and the reason why I say that is because so many of them are so similar. So if you can have that bit of extra top speed, that can really come in useful on the right track, such as Monza, Le Mans, and various others. If you don't have that option, well, you can't use it, obviously. Now that being said, and as I said in the intro, this is by no means a bad car. The handling is pretty good, not necessarily amazing, I wouldn't say. I don't consider it to be as good as people hype it up as being, but good enough, that's for sure. And the acceleration, especially with NOS, is as quick as you'd expect it to be. But overall, it's just a car which has this mantle of awesomeness placed upon it, which it just doesn't deserve. So if you fancy trying this car as an alternative, or maybe as well as others, then by all means go for it. But be aware, it does have a significant disadvantage in the way of its top speed. But that's it overall for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.